I had a question. How many of you people have used or done veneering in the past? So a little bit, yeah. Good. Well, I hope that I can teach you something with this presentation and that you might consider doing veneering in the future. This is just getting started. Veneering can be a vast topic, like lots of our topics in woodworking. But the first question would be, well, why use veneer, I guess? I think it was Tim who said when sent me an email or something, said, when I think of veneering, I think of, crappy furniture that's made of a particle board that has a thin surface on it, and it ends up usually on the street corner. This was taken 2 days ago. So there's an example. And I'm not sure that's actually even veneer. I think it's some kind of paper substitute stuff that they put over cheap furniture. Not all things in IKEA are necessarily terrible. I think some things are actually pretty good, but some of their stuff and some of the boxed furniture like it is truly crap. On the other hand, see if this will work. This piece here, I saw at an art museum in Minneapolis, and it absolutely blew my mind. This is a curiosity cabinet, they called it, that they made in the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries. It's completely covered with unbelievable marquetry and designs made with veneer. So why use veneer? I think, for one thing, veneer has been used for a very long time, and it allows for ornamentation of our pieces, of our furniture and other pieces that's really hard to match with solid wood, if not impossible. I mean, it could possibly be done, but it's very hard to do without veneer. This guy here, I don't fortunately know his name right off the top of my head. This was at the Fine Woodworking Show a few years ago. This fellow here from Frederick, Maryland, I believe. I thought his pieces were fabulous, and he had best of show. You see the ornamentation that's possible with the veneer that he uses. Another reason that I think veneer is a real good option is that the variety is mind-boggling. There are so many different kinds of veneers that you can use. The kinds of veneers from woods that you can't find anywhere else. Or if you're lucky, you might be able to, but otherwise it'd be very difficult to find them in order to build something in solid wood. But veneers are very available. I have over here in the corner, if you want to watch, come by later and look through it, I have a set of samples of veneers that I've collected over the last few years. And there are literally thousands more. And they come in beautiful shapes and colors and figure and the rest. Affordability is another thing, of course. Solid wood, it's more and more expensive, and veneers can cover a lot more surface, much cheaper cost. There is also another thing, not everything that you can do with veneers can you do with solid wood. There are certain limitations to what solid wood will do. And one of those limitations is if you think, for example, of a door frame with a raised panel in the middle of it, you have to join your rails and stiles so that the rails are vertical and the stiles are horizontal and the grains come together with joints. You can't make the whole frame with the grains all going in the same direction. Because of wood moves, you can't do that. Or I suppose you can do it, but it's not going to hold up. It's going to break. It's going to crack. It's not going to be structurally sound, is my point. And with veneers, you can put a veneer around a frame so that the grain is all going in the same direction. Just one example of an application with veneers that you can't do with solid wood. And then finally, I think this is also, to my mind, a very important factor, and that's sustainability. We live in an era of exploitation of the environment and the dangers that that creates, and the destruction of our forests, and the problems that that involves. And I think we all want to be responsible citizens and not use the valuable woods of our forests in an irresponsible way. And I think veneering allows us to make a lot of things with cutting down a lot fewer trees. So those are additional reasons. Well, you can also say that veneering is not something new. In fact, it goes back to the beginnings of furniture making. The Egyptians used veneer for their sarcophagi and for their mummy cases. It still is, of course, a dry climate with not a lot of wood available. And what wood they had, the precious woods they used those to veneer over these mummy cases. And then in the 18th century, the so-called ébénistes, the French cabinet makers, the great French cabinet makers, many of whom were German, by the way, Jean-Henri Wiesener and David Röntgen and others. If you Google their names, and by the way, I put together a list of resources, and I mentioned these names. You can read that on the list there and Google them and see the fabulous work, just absolutely mind-boggling work. There was, just as an aside, this guy here, David Röntgen, the Röntgen studios in the mid 18th century produced some absolutely exquisite furniture, perhaps some of the greatest furniture ever made. And they had an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, maybe 10 years ago now already. And you'd go inside, and he had something called the Berlin cabinet, the Berlin secretary cabinet, that has all these different hidden secret compartments. It just you will never see anything like that. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. Here, closer to home, Townsend Goddard, the Newport cabinet makers, they used veneers. They used veneers, the crotch veneers that they would use for the doors of some of their works. More recently, Art Deco also were very fond of veneers and made some beautiful things. So look them up. Here are some examples. This one is an example of that guy Röntgen, and this is the French guy Wiesner. And this is the more recent Art Deco example. So I haven't been doing veneering all that long myself. I tried one project a long time ago, a small little clock, and I kind of liked it, but I didn't do anything since. And then I went to the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship in Rockport, Maine in July of 2019. And I took a course with this guy here, Adrian Ferrazzuti. And Adrian, it was just a week-long course, and we learned a ton of stuff about veneering in a very short period of time. It was extremely worthwhile. And if you look up his name and Google his name, you'll see also that he is a fine professional box maker, furniture maker with just exquisite examples of veneering. So here are a couple of boxes that are examples of things I've made. This one here uses a very elaborate okume. It's called okume crotch veneer for the top. And I'm going to be talking about this kind of design. I came up with this design some time ago. And This one right here was a commission my son made to me. He said, got friends getting married. Would you make us a box for their wedding? And I came up with this idea of interlocking rings because it's symbolic of matrimony. Over here, I have another box like it. This one it's called black limba. It's the wood itself. The top is white limba. The same wood, but they have a different, depending on the cut of the wood. And I made this for my in-laws. My father-in-law passed away at 99. My mother-in-law passed away last year, July, at 100. And they wanted to have their ashes spread on Long Island Sound because they were great sailors. They loved sailing. So I made them a box for the ashes. And then on the outside, because they were married for over 75 years, symbol of marriage and matrimony. Inside is the compass rose for navigating. Another thing I made over here, maybe you can hold it up, Ken. I made a backgammon board. My father-in-law was really into backgammon playing. And so, and if you turn it around, you see the other side. That's what I started off with and then decided to turn it into. That was a project, by the way, we had at the class at the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship. One other example of, I didn't make it, but this is a light, which is, I can't remember the name of the guy who we went to visit, but it was a place in Attleboro. What was his name again? Yes, it was Jesse's shop. And he uses veneers to make lighting, some really spectacular lighting. And this one is just a piece of, I think it's Carpathian elm that is wrapped around a acrylic plastic tube and glued to that way. And it sends off a really nice light. Sure, let's do that. On there again. I think it's just there. You can really see the green, how it just goes in all directions, and the beauty of the wood just shines, literally shines through. By the way, this here kind of thing, cutting out the circles. I'll show you how I do that later. And I have an example here, partly done. Well, this is just a hodgepodge thing I put together, but we can put it in the press later, so I can demonstrate how that's done. Here are some more items of things I made. This is called, these are called Lewis cubes. Terrible picture, but the idea is that you get this, the way that these cubes are put together, that you can't tell what's coming out and what's receding. It's a three-dimensional effect. All right. So some of the characteristics of veneer are that they're cut in various ways. They're cut either in what they call a rotary cut. And a rotary cut is a lot like turning. What they do is they put the log between two spindles on the end, turn the log, and then put a very sharp, long, very sharp blade and gradually move it into the log, and that peels off the sections of veneer. Just like with cutting solid lumber, they also have quarter cut veneers. So they'll cut the log. I don't know if you're familiar, maybe all be familiar with the difference between a plain cut and a quarter or rift sawn is. But if you take a log and you look at it at the end, if you're just making one slice after the other through the log longitudinally, that you end up with is plain sawn lumber. If you cut the log into quarters and then cut the bottom sections of those quarters, you'll have a different figure, which is called quarter cut. And that brings out different features of wood. The most common, I think, is white oak. White oak is often quarter cut because it shows these medullary rays that come out that are not visible at all. They're beautiful, but they're not visible at all if you plain cut it. The same thing is true then with veneers. The veneers come in bundles often. Here's an example. Here's a bundle of a walnut burl that I purchased. Here's another one that's half done already. This is redwood burl, beautiful stuff. So they come in bundles, and each piece is called a leaf. So it's very important in making things with veneer, particularly if you are going to be making book matched things or starburst patterns and other patterns, to keep each leaf in the bundle in sequence. I'll give you an example of why that's important later. This is a piece of bird's eye veneer, and I've been laying it flat for months, and it's still in this direction. It's so brittle, it's not flat, and I couldn't make anything with it as is. But I did take some of these things. I did make some panels on the headboard of a bed I made. And to do that, what you have to do is you have to soften the veneer. You have to make it so that it's not brittle and not doesn't have all of these bumps and ridges in it. And to do that, you use veneer softener. The formula are 4 parts water. Now, the second thing in the formula, 2 parts white or yellow glue for sizing, that's optional. You don't have to have that in your softener. 1 part denatured alcohol and 1 part glycerin.
Can you define sizing?
Sizing means that you're putting the glue actually in the wood. Sizing it means that a glue solution, a very diluted glue, is permeated in the wood. Now that has some advantages as far as bleed through when you're gluing something to your substrate. Sizing it ahead of time will help prevent the glue from seeping through and showing through on the other side. But it's not necessary in a lot of cases. Okay. But I just mentioned the word substrate. Everything that you make with veneering pretty much is glued to a board, some kind of board, the substrate. And the most common ones are Baltic birch, or birch, a nice plywood, or different kinds of MDF. This, I think, is called hardboard, and this is MDF, so not exactly the same thing, although they're very similar. Or solid wood. Lots of times veneering is done right over wood itself.
Carl,
Yes.
camera's purpose, going to try to make sure you come in front of the table when you're, or at least at the corner of the table when you're showing things.
Okay, great. I'll try to do that. Where was I? People think, MDF, I'm not going to make fine furniture out of MDF, am I? Why use MDF? Medium density fiberboard. It's actually ideal for veneering because of a couple of things. One is that it is extremely uh, stable. When they produce it extremely stable and very flat. It's so flat, much flatter than you get solid wood to be, or even plywood to be. So that's the primary reason. Also, it's inexpensive. And as long as you do the right kinds of veneering and you frame it in the right way so that moisture doesn't get at your piece. Moisture will do a job on MDF, but if you keep it from getting moisture attacking it, it will stay solid and stay secure and flat. So it's actually considered the substrate of choice. The other thing you need of glues, you have to have a glue to glue your veneer down to your substrate. And in this book that I was reading just recently, he talked about 3 different types of glue: a flexible glue, a semi-rigid glue, or a rigid glue. Sometimes I have heard of this too, of people using contact cement for veneering, and it's not recommended. Generally, they say stay away from contact cement. It's not strong enough. It's flexible, that is, you can move your piece around somewhat, but it does not adhere very well in the long term. More common and easy to get are just simple PVA glues, which are the white or yellow glues. They come in a variety of grades. This is Titebond 2. Titebond 1 is also very good. Titebond also makes one veneering glue, which I think is probably the same thing pretty much as Titebond 3. Other glues that they use are, well, you probably all heard of hide gluing and hammer veneering. I'm not going to be talking about that. I tried it once. It was too difficult. I just couldn't do it.
That's why I haven't had it.
That's why you got it. You'll do a much better job than I will. Now, hide glue, you know, it's the traditional way. It's the way they did it in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, but it's very tricky. It takes a lot of skill to get good at, and it's much easier to do it this way. So I'm doing it this way with PVA. Another glue that's widely used in veneering, and it's actually recommended by this fellow I was talking about in the book, is urea formaldehyde. Actually, Gorilla Glue is not urea formaldehyde. Gorilla Glue is something else. It's a polyurethane type glue. You can use it. You can use Gorilla Glue, but urea formaldehyde, I think that's called something like Pro Glue or something, that you mix a powder with water. It's kind of volatile stuff. You should wear gloves and a respirator probably when you're mixing this stuff, because it's not too good for your health, but apparently leaves a very rigid glue line. So it's a recommended glue. But PVA, I've basically just used a PVA glue, and it's worked fine in all of my applications. You have to have something to press the veneer. The veneer uses a glue on the substrate, but then has to be put under considerable pressure. But the good news here is if you want to get started with veneering, you can do this basically with stuff that you already have in your shop. An example would be if you took veneers and simply took 2 pieces of, away from it, 2 pieces of plywood or melanite, put the veneer between them, and then put cawls across the top and clamp them down. Now, these cawls are a little small, but ideally the cawls would stretch over the entire surface here, and you could put clamps all around it. The idea of these, however, is that they have a slight curve in them. And that curve, there, maybe you can see it, that curve allows your clamps to reach and put pressure on the center of your board. So slightly curved calls are what you want. I think one time I brought in a bookbinder's press that I have been using for veneering. Everybody know what that is? What they look like? It's got a big round circle on top. I got one on Craigslist and I've used it a lot and it works great. It gives even pressure, but only for small pieces, 12 inches square at most. Then you can get dedicated veneer presses that are larger, that handle much larger pieces, that have screwed down screws on top. You can make those yourself. There are parts that you can buy to build them yourself. And again, I have a sheet over here that has all the I'm talking about. But there's an issue in the fine woodworking from 1984, going back that far. But it tells you how to build your own veneer press if you're interested in doing that. And then finally, the press that I have over here is called a vacuum press. It's a bag. It's a large bag, plastic bag connected to a pump down here, a vacuum pump. And it creates a vacuum inside this bag, which amounts to something like 14 pounds per square inch. It uses the atmospheric pressure when you create the vacuum inside the bag. And it works terrifically well. You put, bring this over here.
Stay there. I got it. Stay there. Camera.
Okay, great.
That is easy peasy.
You would put your piece on its substrate, whatever it is, and put it between these melamine boards after it's glued up. Then when you turn on the pump and insert it inside the bag, within a few minutes, the air is out of the bag, the vacuum is created, it creates a tremendous pressure. And depending upon the glue you're using, it should stay in the bag for about a half an hour to an hour at the max. With other glues, maybe longer than that. But it creates, that's a great press to use. It's not inexpensive. I got this one given to me, which I'm very grateful for. And I'm using it as long as Tom doesn't need it. When he wants it, he can have it back. But that's the other press. Okay, I'm coming to the end of this part now. What else do you need? And I said before, you can get started in veneering for a very modest amount of money. It does not cost much at all. If you make something, your press like this using the clamps that you have at home, costs virtually nothing. You need something though to cut the veneer. And this little object here is a veneer saw dedicated for cutting veneers. It's interesting in that it has this side of the saw is straight up and down. There's a slight bevel on this side. And the reason is when you have your fence that you're cutting the veneer with, you want to cut that piece straight up and down so that when you join two pieces of veneer, they join together tightly. So that's a veneer saw. These are the items that I use mostly. They don't recommend them, but I'll tell you why I use them. This is just a simple utility knife or a snap knife. I think many of you have seen these. Once you wear out the blade on top, it just snaps off and you have a fresh blade. Or one of these is X-Acto knives work. Or a scalpel. And you can buy scalpels online for very little money. Now, why don't they recommend these? Well, the X-Acto and the scalpel can wander on you. If you're going to be cutting along a straight edge, say, and you're using the scalpel, it can follow if you're not really careful, it can follow the grain of the veneer. And you end up then with a not quite so straight line. The same thing too with the other knives, the snap knife. If that happens, what you can do and what is often recommended is you cut your pieces. So you cut your pieces and look at the edge. It's not good at all. You take the two pieces that you've cut, put them together, and you can use a sand block. This is exaggerated, this one won't work so well, but you can use a sand block to sand them flat. Also recommended. Also a very simple thing, costs virtually no money. What I think is very important is to have, and I think this might be the most expensive item actually, is this kind of these self-healing mats. I don't know if you've all seen these things, they're pretty common. They have a wonderful feature, and that is you can cut on them and they heal themselves. You can't cut through them. They also have a nice grid layout, so that helps you follow the line, helps you lay it out. So cutting it on one of these self-healing mats really helps. I mentioned the sanding block. Another way to cut your veneers and to get your veneers to be very straight, because when you're putting together veneers to make a pattern, you want to make sure, for example, like the backgammon set, you want it to make sure that they are tight together, that all the joints together of the pieces are tight together. Another way to do that is to use a plane with a shooting board. Or if you have a track saw, Festool makes them. They're very expensive, but they're extremely useful, or router will work. You can take your bundle of veneers, put them together and run them through either table saw will sometimes work, or with a track saw. Tape is very important. Blue tape works fine. The painter's tapes are not quite, are not as strong. This kind of blue tape here, I made this little tape dispenser because I was using so much of it. But this is really good because it's flexible. It has a bit of elasticity in it, and that will become important when you're trying to take two pieces of veneer and bring them together and hold them together. Sponge or an envelope licker. These are, this is called roller balls. These I use to spread the glue out evenly. You can get them in any art supply store. They're really easily available. Or if you're doing a big surface with lots of glue that you're trying to spread all over and get even, these foam rollers, paint rollers that are foam, they work great as well. To get the seams to be really tight, a wallpaper roller. And then finally, the last piece I have here are just simply mirrors. And I'll explain why you would use mirrors in a moment. So one of the things that you can do with veneering and to get started, very simply, say you want to do a box like Ken saw over here, and you want a flatter box, a lower box, some kind of a jewelry box, and you want to have the cover be the top, the panel inside the top. If you want it to be something unusual, something beautiful, something exciting, something different, you might take this kind of examples here. This is imbuya. You might take a piece of imbuya like this and cut it and use that on a substrate to put that as the top, or certainly one of these walnut burls, or I think this is called timio, has some beautiful green and beautiful color, and it has that chatoyance, you know, that kind of glittering look, depending upon how the light hits it.
You spell chateau, so I want to look it up.
Who's French here? Somebody, you know,
I'm just kidding, I'm sorry.
ask me later. That's good. Yeah, that's how it starts.
H-A-T-O-Y-A-N-C-E.
I think so. This is another one that really caught my eye. That's really pretty fantastic. This is a Japanese elm, some kind of, I can't remember the exact name right off the top of my head, but also beautiful. So you wanted to just do a simple top. You take your substrate, you glue it, press this down and put it in your press or in your vacuum press. But one key thing you have to remember when you're doing veneering, and that is when you put this down and glue this down, it gets the forces on it are really strong. You need to balance it. You need to have another piece of veneer on the backside. You can never really get away with veneering just one side. Okay, sometimes, of course, you can, but almost always the rule is that you need to veneer both sides of your substrate to balance out the forces. The forces of the glue and the veneer on the substrate, particularly if it's a thin substrate, are such that will just warp your substrate. So you need a veneer on both sides.
You need glue. You need to glue it on the other side.
Yes, yes, you need to glue it on both sides. Now, I'll give you a show of how that's done. It's very simple, but I'll give you a show in a moment how that's done. How are we doing for time? Okay. What you can do with veneering beyond just using a simple sheet and putting that over a substrate is you can do matching. And that's where veneer, I think, really shines. The example here on the left are 4 pieces of this walnut, this kind of walnut burl here, 4 pieces of it put together in such a way that you end up with that kind of beautiful image on the left. The second kind of book matching is called starburst, or there are other names for it. I don't remember. But it also takes different pieces of veneer and puts them together in such a way that you end up with a beautiful pattern. That's where this mirror thing comes into play. Because when you take your sequence of veneers and you want to make this kind of 4-matched veneer, if you take the mirror set and set it up on your piece, you can move it around. I don't know if you can see this. You can all see this. But you can move it around in different ways to give you an idea. So there you have 4 pieces. That's looking something like the one up there. This allows you to see in advance what the combination of the 4 pieces would look like. If you put it closer together, how many pieces we have there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a radial. That's like a radial example with on the right. So that's what this mirror set is used for. Any questions about that so far? Just a few more things, and I want to show a little demonstration. Another part, and this is really gets into the more advanced part of veneering. Another really terrific thing with veneering is marquetry. And marquetry is basically taking small little wooden pieces of wood or pieces of veneer and making pictures with it. And one of the great proponents, one of the great executors of this type of woodworking these days is a fellow by the name of Silas Kopf. And Silas Kopf is a master marquetry maker. This is an example of this trompe l'oeil thing. Don't ask me how to spell it. Picture with wood. Similar is parquetry. And parquetry is very much like marquetry, only it relies on geometric forms, strictly geometric forms. That's the only difference. All right, that's where I'm going to end this part. I have over here a list of these resources where you can buy veneer. If you want to find out more about it, some sources that you can read up on. And what I would like to do next is just show you, demonstrate here how I would make something like the top here of this box. You bear with me. What I want to do is turn this guy on. But first of all, I need to glue up my pieces. So the substrate that I'm going to use, where did I put it?
Down here.
No, that's not the one I want to use.
Inside the,
Thank you. So this is MDF, 1/4 inch, very stable, very dimensionally accurate and flat. I'm going to use this as my substrate. I'm going to take this piece here and I'm going to make this my top. And I'm going to take this piece here, these pieces here, and I'm going to use that as the reverse side. So they're balanced. What I particularly wanted to show you was how do I make a design like this? And how do I make a design with these circles? It's really not too difficult. If you have this little guy, this is from Veritas, and it's their stringing set, so-called, because it has pieces for inlaying, making stringing for decorative design. And basically, what it amounts to is nothing more than a compass, essentially, with a cutter. So I just set that in my piece and carefully cut around. Actually, I don't even need that. That's the guide. Just goes in like this. I just carefully cut around and make my circle. Then to make these guys here, or a full circle, I keep the same diameter. I don't change it at all. I just keep the same diameter. And then I use a different wood, a contrasting wood, to cut out, in this case, a walnut circle, or over here, a redwood burl. These, the rings, are a little trickier because I have to cut out the large hole. Then I have to cut out the same diameter, a ring that will fit into that hole. And then I have to cut yet another hole that will that'll make the ring itself, and that will fill in the ring.
You want to cut through 2 layers at once to simplify that?
It could be done, except this tool has a hard time getting through 1 layer. When they do marquetry, they often use scroll saws, for example, and cut through a whole packet of 8 or 9 different veneers in one sandwich. But with this tool, it's quite tricky just to get through once. So I only cut one at a time.
That center pivot on that damaged does the center pivot on that particular compass leave a mark in the
It does. It leaves a mark. There are ways to get around it. And that is, so Ken's question was, if I'm cutting a hole through this veneer and I want to use the whole piece, doesn't it leave a hole in the middle? Yeah, it does. There are a couple of things I could do. I could put a tape, another piece of veneer down over it, right in the middle, to limit that hole, the size of that hole. But still have a slight pinprick in there. To heal it, another way to do it would be to make a little bit of sawdust from the same veneer that I'm cutting out, and put that together with a little bit of glue and fill it in that way. But yes, it does leave a hole. Okay. So after I've cut out all these pieces, what do? I have all these pieces, I put them together. This is the glue surface. This will be the glue surface. I keep them all together with tape. I use this blue tape to tape all of these pieces together on one side. Then I turn it over. And I use the veneering tape. This is gum tape, very simple gum tape. The glue becomes active as soon as it gets wet. So and here's where I use my little sponge. I put some of that on my tape, and it's very sticky. The beauty of this stuff, though, is that once I have it all together like this, I'm going to be putting it in the press. When I take it out, I'll just wet these pieces again, and they peel right off. So let's do this.
End up being on the outside surface.
This ends up being on the outside surface because it will be taken off. After it's all glued up and dried, piece will then be taken off. So in order to put them all together, first of all, you put blue tape all on this side. Everything is covered with blue tape. That holds all the pieces in place. Then I turn around and I put the veneering tape, the gum tape on this side. And once this is dried, it now stays put. Then I can go back, and I want to leave that blue tape on there. Then I can take that blue tape off. The blue tape does not go into the press. Okay. So the piece I want to make should be slightly less in dimension than my substrate. So I'll cut this. Use this. Just to make it the right dimension. I'll show you in a second what I just talked about. Okay, so that's my piece. But remember, I said you have to have two pieces, one on the front and one on the back. You have to have one on the back, otherwise it'll just warp all out of control. So I'm going to use these two pieces for my back. Okay, so here's the process. I put the pieces, since it's substrate is too wide, put these pieces together. I'm going to come around this way. And I'm going to take some of this tape. This is the blue tape. And I put these places together. I don't need a lot of it. But as I said, this is stretches, and it will pull the two pieces. What's good about this tape is it will actually pull the two pieces together so that they don't have a gap between them. Now, this is obviously longer than I need, so I'm going to cut this now. So it's the size that I want. So this is going to go on the back. I put them together the way that I want it, using the blue tape. Then I take the veneering tape and I put it on the show side. This goes on the show side. The blue stuff goes on the back side. Now, because this is a demonstration, I'm not going to let it dry, which it should do. Should let it dry before I go further. But I'm just going to cut this off, cut this off. And now I can take the blue tape off, because it's held together with the other tape. This is actually a little wide for my substrate. I'm gonna cut off a section on this corner. The substrate should be a little larger than my piece. So now I'm ready to glue up. And when I'm glued up, then I will put it over there. This is what I use the roller for. I want to make sure that I cover my surface well. Remember, the white tape goes up. Let's put it on there. Now I turn it over. And do the same thing over here.
You only ever glue one surface, not both?
Right. With hammer veneering and hide glue, you glue the entire thing. It's another reason not to do it. Again, I'm going to take my show piece. This is the surface of the show. I put this down on it. Now, in order to hold these pieces together, because they're going to want to curl up, I use the tape just a little bit in the corner, just to hold them together onto the substrate. All right, then the next thing is, we're almost done. The next thing is it has to get pressed. So glued it all up, cut it all up, glued it all, and now it has to get pressed. So what I will do is put this between these two boards of melamine. Now I don't have to worry in this case that this glue will stick to this, because it doesn't stick to melamine. Now, this goes in as a sandwich into the bag, and maybe you can give me a hand here so I can get this in there. And it goes under a sheet of plastic. It's like window netting. Window screen stuff. It's a little different than that, but that keeps the pressure equally distributed. Now, this is the hard part. To lock up the bag, have these devices on both ends. Now, this plastic is heavy duty. So if we can get this, how's it doing on that end? Yeah, that's all it needs to go. It's just one. Whoops.
That's okay. It's only my ear.
No. Okay. Ready?
All right.
Go. So it's flattening this out really nicely around these calls. And the pump goes this way until it reaches a certain point where it stops. It doesn't go on. There are different kinds of pumps. Some will run all the time. That'll drive you a little crazy. But some of them run to a certain level where they reach and then they stop, and then 20 minutes later they'll start up again. Stop. But altogether, this should be in here for about, well, 30 minutes will probably be enough, but ideally more like an hour. When it's done, when you take it out of the bag, but it leaves the vacuum, take it out of the bag, then you need, it's important, it's still a little wet. Yeah. Store it upright so that both sides, the back side and the front side, can dry out at the same time, dry out equally. You just set it down on a flat surface, and one side is wet, the other is not. You're inviting stuff like wood. What it is. So basically, that's my demonstration. That's what I have this evening. If you want to, I have some paper over here with resources, references, inspiration. But I encourage you to try it. You can try it at a very simple level. Like I started off making your own little press, and then you might get turned on to it like I did.